This is the week we're told temperatures here in the southeast of the UK are going to plummet to minus 15 degrees Celsius. Good job we're wrapped up warm in the studio with our exclusive Partners in Crime mugs. Welcome to episode 6.
This is Partners in Crime with Adam Croft and Robert Dawes.
A very special episode this week, Bob, for a number of reasons. Not only have we got a cracking guest, but it's also our Granite Noir special.
It is indeed. I've just got back from Aberdeen. Had a wonderful time at Granite Noir, Aberdeen's wonderful crime writing literary festival. Met lots of friends, made lots of new ones, and had an absolutely fascinating and wonderful time. More of that a little later on.
Yes, we will let you know about our guest, first of all, that will be coming out a little bit later on the show. It's none other than Peter James, perhaps the absolute number one crime writer certainly in Britain at the moment, possibly in the world, I think.
Well, I mean, it was phenomenal international success with his Roy Grace series, Chief Inspector Roy Grace, and all his other books and writings as well. We'll be talking to him about his books, about his stage adaptations, and lots of other things, and his new standalone novel, which sounds absolutely fascinating.
It does, yes, and something that fascinates me is the fact that he's sold more than 20 million books, which makes my 1.5 million sound quite pathetic.
I don't know, 1.5 million sounds pretty good to me.
Well, I'm happy with it, but 20 million books sold, that's extraordinary.
That's all right, isn't it?
It is, yeah.
Actually, in the introduction, you were referring to the Partners in Crime mugs. I take it that was the ones we're drinking out of, not you and me just sitting here.
No. We are the Partners in Crime mugs with Partners in Crime mugs.
Yes. Okay, thank you for that clarity.
So, Granite Noir, which is where you spent last weekend up in Aberdeen. I hear you had a fantastic time. I loved seeing the photos and the little clips you were sending through to me, and I was insanely jealous that I couldn't make it.
Well, I did have a wonderful time, he said rather smugly. And we're going to be talking a lot more of that. We've got a report coming up about that a little later on. But that brings me very neatly, thank you very much, Adam, into my recommendations for the week.
Almost like we planned it.
Almost like it was scripted, which... It isn't. No, it really isn't. You should see the desk in front of us. What a mess. But anyway, if you like your Scandi noir dark, then look no further than the works of Thomas Enger. He is hugely well known for his Henning Jewell series, following the trials and tribulations of crime reporter Henning Jewell. Now, I started reading these books, or I read the fourth in a series of, it's now 5 books, and I have to say, I read Cursed, which was described by the European Literature Network as being written with verve, colour and pace that builds to a thrilling climax, cleverly and deftly weaving a complex of fictional elements into some uncomfortable details of his country's history. Highly recommended. Well, I would say hugely recommended by myself. His new book, published by Arenda, is called Killed, and it has just been published. He's a fascinating writer. I find his work dark, disturbing, fascinating, absolutely gripping, and I really cannot recommend Thomas Enger enough. His new book, Killed, is out now. There are 5 of them. I've read Cursed. I'm a quarter of the way through Killed and absolutely hooked. They work pretty well, very well as standalone. But if you want to go back to the beginning of the series, please do, and follow the adventures of Henning Jewell by the wonderful Thomas Enger.
I will look out for them. And your second recommendation
is the works of Joanna Gustafsson, a fascinating author. I think she's absolutely brilliant. She is French-born, married to a Swede, and lives in London, and co-authored the bestselling On se retrouvera, whose television adaptation in 2015 drew over 7 million viewers. Now, her book, Block 46, was a solo debut set in present-day Sweden and London, and in the concentration camp Buchenwald in 1944, and asks, can a profiler and true crime writer discover what links deaths in different countries to one of the most horrific tragedies of the past? I think it's a great book. She moves between different times and different places with great dexterity. Her language is wonderful, and it's a truly gripping and very emotional read. So I can recommend that. Her new book, Keeper, is out soon with the same characters, but this time goes back even further in time to 1888 and the case of Jack the Ripper. And it was based on the fact that she found out that one of Jack the Ripper's victims was indeed Swedish. And that set her thinking about this particular novel. So that is Joanna Gustafsson. Recommend her. Look out for Block 46 and Keeper. Great books, published by Arenda and available as ebooks too.
Well, if that's got you in the mood for buying some books, then we strongly recommend you head over to our partners and sponsors on the podcast. That's Kobo. If you head over to kobo.com, they have more than 5 million ebook titles available, and listeners to Partners in Crime can get a very, very exclusive 90% off of their first ebook purchase with Kobo. 90% off. That's an extraordinarily kind offer from Kobo. All you need to do is pick the book that you want to buy and enter the promo code CRIME at the checkout. If you want to get in touch with the show as well, we're on Twitter at CrimeFic Podcast. We're on Facebook under Partners in Crime Podcast, and our website is partnersincrime.online, or you can email hello@partnersincrime.online. Okay, I think we're going to have a listen to your report from Granite Noir now. While you're away, you were sending me audio clips from Granite Noir, which is a fascinating kind of live update, and I've edited them down now. And we're
edited me out if you had any sense.
Yes. So we're gonna have a listen to that now, and just to get a flavour of what it's like to be a guest speaker at a festival, because it's not something that everybody will have experienced, of course, and some people won't have been to book festivals at all. Some people will have been, but will have been in the audience. So it's a lovely behind the scenes look at life at a festival for an author, I think.
Well, I hope you enjoy it. It was, as you say, in my profession as an actor, you call it a behind the scenes, a behind the camera look. And I wanted to just talk to people who organise these events, people who chair these events, publishers who actually bring their writers to them, to get a different view of what literary festivals are like. And there's such a proliferation of them over the last few years, and they are hugely popular. And ask a few questions and find out why there are so many of literary festivals, and indeed why they are so popular. So well, you got some fantastic guests that you spoke to there, so we're going to have a listen to that now. This is the behind the scenes look at Granite Noir, and this is the director's cut. Slamming his car boot shut, the man picked up his case and headed towards Terminal 2 at Heathrow Airport. Thoughts of murder in his mind. Well, a bit of a dodgy line to start up. A murder mystery novel, perhaps, but it's the best I can do as I start my report on my journey to Granite Noir, the crime festival for all writers and readers of criminal fiction in Scotland's very own Aberdeen. Well, here I am in a quiet little spot in Terminal 2. I'm on the lookout for my dear friend, actor and thriller writer, Mr. Hugh Fraser, known to millions of people worldwide as Captain Hastings in Poirot. We're both flying up to Aberdeen, as I mentioned a little early on, the Crime Writing Festival in Scotland, and if we can find each other and check in and get on the plane on time, which will be a miracle, we'll be there this afternoon. So wish us luck, and where is he? Well, I've found Mr. Fraser, and we have subsequently sat down and had ourselves a bacon sandwich and a nice cup of Americano, and we are waiting to board our plane to Aberdeen. Good morning, Hugh. How are you?
I'm very well, thank you. Relieved that we managed to check in without any problems, because neither of us can work the electronic stuff.
No,
have
we're both
our phones and things. We had to go to a lady behind a desk who took our passports and looked at them and then gave us a piece of paper which tells us which seat we're sitting in, which suits me fine.
Yes. basically, when we check in at an airport, we head to the desk which says kindergarten. please help. So anyway, we're off to Granite Noir. Are you looking forward to that?
Yes, very much so. I haven't been to Aberdeen for, well, it must be about 30 years. And it's a beautiful city. Very much looking forward to seeing it, and also to meeting Lee Randall and all the people who run Granite Noir.
Great. Well, we're going to board our plane, and au revoir for now.
Au revoir.
Well, here we are in the Lemon Tree in Aberdeen, and in the studio. You and I have booked into our hotels, separate rooms, and we're here in the green room, and we've been chatting to the festival organiser, Lee Randall, who's absolutely fascinating. I'll be talking to her a little later on, and various other people. Falmouth was on last night, a huge success, and there's a huge array of crime writers here talking about what they do, how they do it, why they do it, etc. And we're about to go on. You can hear the warm-up music in the studio. There's about 160 seats here, a very comfortable sofa with flowers, and just a great atmosphere. It's the first time I've ever been to Aberdeen, and it's extraordinary, very beautiful, I have to say. So, yeah, I'll be talking to you a little later on. I'll just do my vocal warm-up and deal with the butterflies in my tummy.
Should we sit down?
Yeah, well, we'll sit down. Here we are with Hugh in the green room just before going on. Any immediate thoughts about Aberdeen and the festival?
Well, we had the most delicious vegan lunch I can't remember the name of it, can I? Can you remember the name?
No, I can remember the food.
Anyway, if you're ever in Aberdeen, find the vegan restaurant,
Yes.
because it was absolutely stunning food.
Yeah.
There was a turmeric shake.
It was a turmeric. It's sort of a it was a sort of coffee without coffee.
Yes.
It looked like a cappuccino, but with turmeric in it and
Yes.
coconut milk.
Coconut milk, that was it. Absolutely superb.
Which was absolutely delicious. So basically, we've had a lovely lunch. It's not bad, this festival junket thing, and we're now in the green room, surrounded by authors and people looking a little nervous, waiting to go on.
And free tea, don't forget.
And free tea. We've got a nice little bag with all sorts of little goodies in it, so we're quite happy, ready to go on, aren't we? Okay, let's do it. We've just found out what the name is.
The name of the restaurant is the Bonobo. So if you're ever in Aberdeen, go to the Bonobo.
And we're talking to two wonderful people who are working on the festival. What's your name?
Rachel Miller.
Rachel Miller.
Emma Burney.
Great. And they're the ones who knew the name of our wonderful vegan restaurant, and they're looking after us right royally and having a marvellous time. So, right, that's it.
Good.
If you're in Aberdeen, go to the Bonobo vegan restaurant.
Even if you're not a vegan.
Even if you're not a vegan. I'm not a vegan. Well, we've just finished the session, which has been absolutely great fun with a packed house, and our wonderful chair is Craig Sisterson, who is a New Zealand journalist, crime expert, and encyclopedic knowledge of crime, the crime genre, writes articles published throughout the world. Craig, how did you think it went?
Well, thank you very much for that kind introduction, Robert. I'm going to use you from now on to introduce me at festivals. I thought it went fantastically. It was a full house, and the audience were really into it. Loved the conversations. We veered everything from books to screen, and lots of stuff about crime and its social context. Loved talking about your books. So many great questions from the audience. It was just brilliant.
It was a very warm house, wasn't it? I have to say, you orchestrated it. You conducted it marvellously.
I feel you're giving me far too much credit. It's
I'm not. I sit in these things, and there's a Liverpudlian phrase when you're tense and someone's not doing a good job, and it is, I was so tense I couldn't get a tram ticket down the crack in my cheeks, and we were very relaxed on the sofa today.
I was very pleased to have you say that. I mean, it's always easy when you have great authors on stage to talk to who are knowledgeable and write great books, but they also can talk so well. And you and Hugh were just brilliant, giving some really insightful answers. You heard the laughter in the audience. You heard the audience kind of like just they were hanging on every word you guys were saying.
Can you just tell our readers that you have an award that you supervise?
Yes, I mean, I do a few different things around the world. I'm actually a judge of the McIlvenney Prize, the Scottish Crime Writing Award as well. But I founded the Nio Marsh Award Award.
Wow.
Which is New Zealand's crime writing prize, because several years ago we realised New Zealand didn't have a crime writing prize, where most other countries did. We had a lot of good crime writers, so we started one. And it's been running, this is its 9th year now.
Right, so if listeners want to actually get into that, they just have to look that up on the website?
If you Google Noah Marshall Wood, we have a Facebook page and a Twitter page at the moment. We don't have a separate website yet, but our Facebook page and our Twitter pages are great for keeping up with a whole lot of New Zealand crime writing things. We've got some great news. We're actually launching a New Zealand crime writing festival next year called Rotorua Noir.
Wonderful.
And so lots of great stuff happening. So.
Smash it. It's a pleasure talking to you, and thanks for the session. It was absolutely great. So it's the morning after the night before, and I'm walking through the streets of Aberdeen from my hotel to the venue for Granite Noir at the Lemon Tree, and it's midday-ish. Anne Cleves is presently talking to an absolutely packed house, so absolutely no tickets available at all, which is a great shame because I would have loved to have seen her. Just walked past Her Majesty's Theatre, where Jekyll and Hyde is on in an adaptation by David Edgar and starring the very fine actor Phil Daniels, who is a lovely fella, a fine golfer too, point of interest. So we're going in now. We're going to see a session this afternoon, and Hugh and I will be catching the plane back a little later on. Just a little update. Talk to you in a bit. Well, here I am with Lee Randall, who is the programmer at Granite Noir and also a professional who gives her advice and energies to many other literary festivals throughout the land. So I'm just going to ask her, why are there so many wonderful literary festivals all of a sudden over the last few years?
I think it's because there's so many wonderful writers and so many enthusiastic readers. People have a real hunger. The human condition is a storytelling condition. We must tell stories. We have to. It's the only way we can understand ourselves. And people like to come out and then they see the words on the page and they say, I want to see the person that made those words be there.
Absolutely. Now, it's quite interesting because crime writing festivals, are particularly popular. What does that say about us?
Well, I tell people the best crime novels, it's a good story well told. There's a beginning, middle, and end. Nothing fancy is going on. You don't have to learn a new language. You don't have. Although we did have a lovely piece in Doric the other day, so maybe I have to take that back. It's a good story well told. You have people you can root for. You have situations that you recognize. You know, there's a monster in the house and it's your husband, or your child goes missing, or the neighbor down the street comes to some strange grisly end, and it's not just that they got their hands stuck in the food disposal. Somebody put it there. These are all things that I hope nobody really has to go through, but they do happen.
Well, you've been particularly marvellous, I think, because there are innovations within Granite Noir, which you run films, film noirs as well in the cinema. You have workshops. You encourage new writers to come and read alongside the established writers as well, to help them. I mean, you program this festival, and I dare say other ones as well, so creatively, and I think to some degree you managed to show a sort of side of crime writing from all potential angles, from people like Val McDermid and Anne Cleves and Chris Brookmeyer, the top professionals, down to the up-and-coming writers, the people of all ages, from young writers to middle-aged writers and older, who are trying their first crime novel and encouraging them. That's a wonderful thing to do. Do you get a buzz out of that?
I get a buzz out of book festivals are my natural habitat. Do you know the story of is it Brer Rabbit, who
yes.
when he misbehaves, he keeps saying, "Don't throw me in the briar patch," and because he really knows that's where he belongs and he can scamper away. Well, don't throw me in a book festival. I'm only going to be happy as Larry.
Well, I've had a wonderful time, and Hugh and I have been up, and you've made us so welcome. We've had a great time. The audiences have been fantastic. Granite Noir finishes today. Mm-hmm. What festival would you recommend next?
Well, for me, possibly the next festival will be the Borders Book Festival in June, although there's a fabulous festival called the Boswell Book Festival in Ayrshire. I'm just talking Scotland now, yeah. Which only does biography and nonfiction, so they don't get a lot of novelists there. That's amazing. And then obviously, come autumn, the Edinburgh Book Festival, I practically move into Charlotte Square, and then I do move to Wigtown in Dumfries and Galloway the end of September, because I just fell in love with Wigtown. I started going there, chairing events, met the people. It's only about 850, 900 people live there throughout the year, and it's the most magical book festival for me. So I don't have favorites, but if beyond Granite Noir, which is my baby, I like to rock up and meet the authors and share it, as many others I can go to.
I envy you. What a wonderful life. Lee Randall, Literary Festival, professional par excellence. Thanks very much.
Thank you.
I'm here at Granite Noir with the wonderful Karen Sullivan of Orenda Books, a very famous publishing house now, specialising in crime, murder mysteries and novels from all over the world, but in particular Scandinavia and in the UK. And she is here at Granite Noir with many of her authors who are splendid. She'll tell you who they are. I'm a big fan of many of them. And she's taking her authors on a road tour around the UK. So here's Karen, just to give it a very pleasant plug.
Yes, we're very excited to be hitting the road with the Orenda Roadshow. Tomorrow night, which is Monday the 26th, we're going to be hitting Liverpool. On Tuesday, we're going to Waterstones in Nottingham, and on Wednesday, we're doing Warwick Books in Warwick. So it'd be great if you could come along and see some of our authors. We've got lots of international authors coming over. We've got Antti Tuomainen from Finland, Thomas Enger from Norway, Lilia Sigurdardottir from Iceland, Simone Buchholz from Germany, Johanna Gustafsson from France, alongside all of our usual amazing authors who are the best purveyors of crime fiction in the UK, including Doug Johnston, Michael Malone, Louise Voss, Louise Beach, Sue Bristow, Matt Veselovsky, Sarah Stovall, Steph Broderick, Lucy Hay, and more. So come and see us. It'd be great to have you along.
And how can they get in touch with Orenda Books?
They can get in touch with us on www.orendabooks.co.uk, or you can purchase tickets directly from the shops to Waterstones, that's in Liverpool and Nottingham, or Warwick Books directly in Warwick.
2 years ago at Harrogate, Peter James said, the publisher to watch is Karen Sullivan at Orenda, and Peter's never wrong. Thanks very much, Karen. All the very best with it.
Thanks for having me.
We've just had a wonderful session at Granite Noir, and I'm talking to two members of the audience, Hilda and Jenny, who have you had a wonderful time?
Wonderful time, very stimulating, lots of new novels, lots of new writers to investigate.
And you?
Fantastic time, going home with a lot of books and can't wait to get stuck into all of them.
Do you have any favourite crime writers?
Paul McDermott.
Absolutely. And you?
Ian Rankin, I think, for me.
Ian Rankin, absolutely.
I'm looking forward to exploring you.
Well, that's very generous of you. Thanks very much. Lovely to meet you. All the very best. Bye-bye.
Thank you.
Starlight, have a pleasant flight. Thank you.
Well, here we are at Aberdeen Airport on the way home. It's literally, excuse the pun, flown by. I've just left Hugh eating his Moroccan chicken couscous. And we're getting ready to fly back home after just a wonderful 24 hours plus. Anyway, talk to you when we get to Heathrow. Here we are, Terminal 2, where we began. Hugh, we're back from Granite Noir. Has it inspired you?
It has indeed. I'm going to go straight home, sit at my laptop and write at least 10 chapters.
Great.
It's been completely stimulating, innovating, inspiring, and that Turkish meal we had last night was delicious.
It was that was the icing on the kebab.
Yeah.
That's it. Well, I agree with you entirely.
So not only have we done a festival, but we have restaurant recommendations. What was it? Kabobo?
Yes, Kabobo for your vegan.
Kabobo for the vegans. And what was it called last night?
I've forgotten. Nigaro?
Nigaro.
God, we're good, aren't we, with
yes,
those?
Yes.
Look them up. One begins with N, one begins with B or H.
Right, so if
whatever.
the writing doesn't work out, we're going to be restaurant critics.
That would be... God, I'd love that.
Wouldn't that be great?
That's food for thought.
Hey, come on, let's think about that.
Well, listen, have a safe journey home. I'll see you probably over the next few weeks.
Absolutely.
And God bless. What fun.
What fun.
At Heathrow, Fraser and Dawes went their separate ways, not knowing what future challenges lay ahead of them. And here I am, case in the back of the car, and the boot closed. Granite Noir, mission very possible, completed.
Did you have fun interviewing people outside the gents' toilets, Bob?
Well, that caught us all by surprise. That was a wonderful Karen Sullivan there. I found a quiet place in the corridor, and it wasn't until people started going in and out of the ladies and gents that I realised we were parallel to them. But being the top professional and trooper that she is, she didn't put her off her stride one little bit. So thank you, Karen.
One thing I did like is the Hugh Fraser falafel reviews, which I think should be a new segment on the show.
We do sound slightly obsessed by food, I have to say.
I think you mentioned food more times than you mentioned crime in that report.
Well, it's very cold in Aberdeen. You work up a considerable hunger, I can tell you. But we were having some very strange senior moments, I thought, turning into Statler and Waldorf from the Muppets, trying to remember those restaurants' names for about the third time.
Well, on that point, I did take the liberty of looking them up.
Oh, did you?
The vegan cafe is called the Bonobo Cafe.
The Bonobo. Right.
The Turkish one, I think, is called the Nargile. I did have a look up the pronunciation, and the G in the middle apparently is a voiced palatal plosive, and I'm not entirely sure what one of those sounds like. So,
well, I don't know if I want to.
No.
But I'm all for plosives. Well, that's fantastic. Thank you for clarifying that for our listeners and anyone who's looking for nice food in Aberdeen. That's probably, we're fast approaching the end of this restaurant critique, I think.
Yes, yeah. Well, if you're looking for good food in Aberdeen, there are places to go to. Unfortunately, if you're looking for books, we haven't got a clue, have we?
None whatsoever.
On to today's interview then, and this is a man who needs no introduction, mainly because Bob did it when we interviewed him. This is Peter James.
Well, we're particularly delighted today to have the international bestseller, who has 12 consecutive Sunday Times #1s, has published his books in 37 languages, as well as being a New York Times bestseller. His D.S. Roy Grace crime novels have sold 19 million copies. I did say 19 million there, copies worldwide. Prior to becoming a full-time author, he was responsible for 25 movies. In 1994, he published his novel Host on 2 floppy disks as the world's first electronic novel. His novels have won numerous awards, including the coveted CWA Diamond Dagger for sustained excellence, and he was publicly voted by W.H. Smith readers the best crime author of all time. I'm not going to argue with that. He also happens to be one of the most wonderful and nicest chaps you'll ever want to meet or chat to. Ladies and gentlemen, please welcome to the show, Peter James. Hello, Peter.
Hello, Bob. How are you?
I'm really very well, thank you.
I recognise myself there, but thank you.
Well, it's all that is you. Now, I'm going to start this little interview, if I may, with a quote from a book. I wonder if you recognise it. It goes something like this. Hale knew, before he had been in Brighton 3 hours, that they meant to murder him. Do you recognise that at all?
With his ink-stained fingers and his furtive look. That is the opening line of the book that made me want to be a crime writer and to write a crime novel set in Brighton, which is Graham Greene's Brighton Rock.
Yes. It's a wonderful book, isn't it? And was it an inspiration to your writing, reading that book? Did it inspire you to write about Brighton in the first place?
Yeah, I did too. It did a number of things. Up until the time I'd read Brighton Rock, I'd always been a kind of huge fan of crime fiction, but the English genre, right back, from even Conan Doyle's time through Agatha Christie, the Golden Age, had a tradition of, you began a novel with a dead body, preferably in the library of a country house,
yes,
and the rest of the book was a puzzle to solve the murder. Graham Greene broke all the rules, and in particular, he broke two key rules for me, and I found the book immensely liberating for that reason. The first was, Hale, the victim, is still alive and in peril at the end of chapter 1, rather than being dead and investigated. So that sets the book really firmly as a kind of page-turning thriller. And secondly, for me, what that book did that was quite extraordinary was it showed me that within the pages of a crime novel, you could actually examine big issues, which I'd never seen before. You know, the Agatha Christie's, lovely books, but they tend to be cozy, puzzle solving.
Yes.
Here you've got Pinky, one of the nastiest villains in all of fiction, you know, a 17-year-old gangster in charge of a bunch of middle-aged, misfit, second-rate criminals. And Pinky is a murderer, but he's also a devout Catholic, terrified of eternal damnation. And it adds such an incredibly rich layer to the book. And on top of that, I think it's got probably the darkest, psychologically darkest ending of any novel ever written.
Yes.
And I put that book down as a kid growing up in Brighton. I read it for the first time when I was 14, and I just vowed, I said, one day I'm going to try and write a crime novel set in this city that's 10% as good as this book.
Well, and succeeded admirably again and again and again, may I say. Now, we'd love to talk about the new book, because there's going to be a new one coming up in June, as ever. I mean, Brighton's extraordinary. Whenever I come down to Brighton, and usually to your launches, they are an extraordinary, I mean, beautifully organised and hosted event. But what is so special about your book launches in Brighton is it's a celebration of not only the books but of the town itself. You're so well thought of, that's to put it mildly, and you give a lot back to the town, and the police force are sort of have become friends over the years. In fact, this is the question I'm leading to. One of the now retired policemen, David Gaylor, was the inspiration for Roy Grace, I believe, and your contacts with him led to your contacts with the Brighton Police Force, which continue, obviously, today. When did that begin in earnest? Was that sort of in researching your very first book for Roy Grace?
Well, it came way before Roy Grace. It was kind of interesting. I've actually got two books out this year. I've got the new Roy Grace, and I've got an autumn book coming out, which I'd love to chat about later on.
Yes, please, yes.
What happened was I'd written my first ever book, which was a not very good spy thriller called Dead Letter Drop, which came out in 1981, and I recently got married and we got burgled.
Right.
And which I can recommend to any newlywed couple, because the excuse to explain what all those horrible ornaments you'd be given are not on display. Aren't that porcelain donkey with a quartz clock in its stomach and the sombrero? They stole it. But a young detective came to take fingerprints, and he saw the book, and he said, "Oh, if you ever want research help from the police, give me a call." And he was married to a detective. And my then wife and I became friendly with them. They invited us to barbecue at their house, to a social night at Brighton Police Station, then to a dinner party. And almost all their friends were also cops,
yes.
Across the whole broad range, from crime scene investigators, homicide detectives, response, neighborhood policing, child protection. And I found these people fascinating to talk to. And I thought, as a writer, for a writer's standpoint, nobody sees more of human life in a 30-year career than a cop. And that was the start of my interest. And when they realized I was genuinely interested, not out just to get a quick story I could flog to the local newspaper, they started to trust me, and they'd invite me out on patrol. And it got to a point after a few years where they phoned me up and said, "We're going on a raid tomorrow. Do you want to join us?" Yes, please. In about 1995, one of the detectives that I'd become friendly with said, "There's a character you might quite like to meet. He's a little bit quirky, but I think you'd find him, get on with him." And I went into this office, and I've never seen an office like it. It was a complete tip. Literally towers of green and blue plastic crates bulging with the manila folders, and his head just visible at the back. And I said, "Are you moving?" And he looked at me and he said, "No, these are my dead friends." And I thought, great, I met the only weirdo in Sussex CID. And this is Dave Gaylor, and he laughed and he said, I'm a homicide detective. I've also just been tasked with reopening all the 35 unsolved murders in the county, the ones where there is still somebody alive who could benefit from the murder inquiry.
Right.
And he said, each one of these crates contain, we've been asked to apply the new advances in DNA and fingerprint technology. Each one of these crates contains the principal case file of an unsolved murder. I'm the last chance the victim has for justice and the family has for closure. And I love that really human image. And he said, what are you writing at the moment? And I was writing a psychological thriller called Denial. He said, tell me about it. So I started talking about it. He said, hang on a sec. Your character wouldn't have done that, I don't think. And why hasn't your detective got an outside inquiry team? And haven't you thought about doing this? And I thought, wow, this guy has got a really creative side to him. And it's something that I've kind of learned subsequently over many years of meeting homicide detectives, that unlike so often the portrayals you see of them on television, where they're kind of bolshy, I think the worst example I've seen of a television detective was in Broadchurch, where I was thinking it was Doctor Who, was just sort of bolshy and angry with everybody. What a really good one does is he's gentle, he's sympathetic, he bonds with the family, because that's the way he gets information out. And what Dave had, and had it in spades, and so many of the really good ones have, is two completely opposite character traits. First is, to be a homicide detective, you have to be incredibly anal, because every major crime is hundreds, if not thousands, of tiny pieces of a puzzle that have to be painstakingly put together. But equally, so many crimes are solved by complete blue sky thinking. And Dave had both those characteristics. And we became friends over the next few years. And he rose up through the ranks to become Detective Chief Superintendent, basically head of major crime Sussex. And in 2002, my publishers, Pam Macmillan, said, have you ever thought of creating a detective as a central character? So I went to Dave and I said, how would you like to be a fictional cop? He just loved it. And he is my real-life Roy Grace. He doesn't have a missing wife, and he doesn't look like Roy, but in terms of career and in terms of work, and he's been a phenomenal boon to me over the years, because not only has he opened doors with police forces around the UK, but police forces around the world.
Yes.
And when we're planning a book, we sit down together. We actually go to a particular table in a local pub, and we take a new moleskin notebook, and we plot it out. And then Dave reads every 100 pages and tells me how Roy Grace would think and react, as a real detective would. And over the years, our friendship's kind of grown to the point when Laura and I got married 3 years ago, Dave was best man. So I always joke, I travel all over the world with him to homicide conferences, and I say most people travel with their private detective. I travel with my private detective chief superintendent.
Well, it's fascinating that, because you were talking about policemen just then, and the way that they go about their business, and it's often said that a good police officer working on an investigation with suspects enters in a form of seduction with the suspect, which from what you've just said, I should imagine you agree with. And it's very, very much the case with Roy Grace. It's not just blue sky with Roy Grace, of course. I mean, the first book I read of yours, which I absolutely loved, was Possession. And you've imbued Roy Grace over the years with an interest in the paranormal and a respect for what certain gifted psychics might be able to bring to an investigation. Does this come from an interest that you've had for very long? I believe, well, I know the answer to this. It began in childhood. You've told me the story about the two old ladies in the Isle of Wight, which I wonder if you'd mention again to our listeners.
Yes, I've always had an interest in the paranormal. And the two old ladies in the Isle of Wight actually came from that detective who came to the house when we were burgled. His father was actually a lighthouse keeper on the Isle of Wight, and he grew up on the Isle of Wight. And he said there was this house across the road, all throughout his childhood, these two little old ladies up on the top floor. And they used to sort of regularly wave at him. And the parents saw it too. And his sister, and they'd wave at the ladies every day, catch a school bus, and come home in the evening, the ladies would be up there, they'd wave again. And Mike Harris had been away from the Isle of Wight for some years when he joined the police, and he came back, and his parents had moved to a different part of the UK. But he went back to the street where they lived, and there was builders knocking down that building opposite, and he said to them, he said, what happened to the two old ladies there? And it turned out that nobody had lived in that house since the 1930s, when the two old ladies had actually gassed themselves. One of them discovered she was terminally ill, and they hadn't wanted to go on. And that came from a cop. And then I talked to the former chief constable of Sussex some years back, and I said, would you ever sanction a police officer going to a psychic? And he said, I would be very wrong not to. He said, what a homicide detective has to do is to solve that murder, or find a kidnapped person, victim, or whatever. And if they have tried every avenue without success, and a psychic phoned up who sounded credible, not batty, but credible, they would be, in my view, derelict in their duty not to at least take a look. And I met a detective inspector who actually, they kiss a lot of frogs in the process of doing that, but I met a detective inspector in Brighton about 10 years ago who actually was given the address of a murder suspect from a pendulum dials over the map.
Good. Wow.
And then in America, I mean, we are so cynical in this country. Whereas, in America, they work with psychics a lot. Although, to what extent they have a success rate, I don't know, because in the UK, our clear-out rate for murder is 93%, and in America, it's about 44%.
I didn't know that. Good grief.
Hey, Peter, you've touched a couple of times on the realism that you try to get into your books, which is a reason why I love them. And I know that for myself and for a number of other crime writers, it's always quite difficult to kind of get that balance between real life and entertainment. I know for me, quite often, a story has to win out and the things have to be less realistic in order to be more entertaining. But you somehow managed to get that fantastic balance where the books are completely realistic, completely true to life and to real procedure, and still manage to be incredibly entertaining. What do you credit that to? What is your secret in that respect?
Thank you. I'm really not a fan of that adage, never let the truth get in the way of a good story, because I think that research underpins. I mean, whenever I teach creative writing, I say that the three inseparable, the trinity is character, research, plot, in that order. We read books to find out what happens to characters that we engage with right at the very beginning. And everybody who reads, by the fact they're reading means they're smart. And I think all of us, when we read, we don't just want to read a good story. We want to learn something about the human condition, about life, about the world in which we live, and why people do what they do, which is, I think, one of the big fascinations of crime. And I put plot third because if you don't care for the character, and then if you don't believe the author knows what he or she is writing about, you rapidly lose all faith in the book. So I think, I'm an absolute stickler for research. I go out with the police regularly in Sussex, almost on a weekly basis, and almost half our circle of friends are police officers these days, because I genuinely like them and find them really engaging people. And I get really annoyed when you watch a crime show on television, and I'm going to come back to Broadchurch because I got to think about that. You've got right in the first episode one, this kid fallen off the cliff on the beach, and they got the crime scene tent over him. Correct, that's what they would do. And the crime scene, the Soccos, the CSIs, I'll call them, all come out of the tent, correct, in their overshoes. And then David Tennant comes out in a Macintosh and brogues.
Yes.
What do the writer and producer of that and all those shows think that Soccos are wearing those white oversuits for? In order so they don't get dirty? To stop them contaminating the crime scene. And the first officer at a dead body or any major crime scene, his first task is to seal it off and not let anybody through, not even the chief constable, unless they're wearing oversuits. And I just try to get those details right, but without making it pedantic. And I think that if you get the details right, but in an engaging way, it adds so much to a story.
In the meantime, you're sitting in your sitting room watching the television, chewing the sofa. I would have thought at times like that. It's but this is. I mean, I've worked with you in theatre a lot and had a wonderful time. You've had a huge success bringing your plays to theatre-going public in this country. Was that something you'd always wanted to do with your books?
Do you know something? No, I'd never really. I love the live theatre. To me, there's a magic about the live theatre. An audience sitting in an enclosed space, and there's real human beings, not just a screen up there. The pod doors, even. My gosh.
Yes, well, the less said about that, the better.
If you happen to go for one of the cheaper shows, perhaps.
No, we got in as a class act.
We had so much fun, but they were sort of beginning then, and they've gone from strength to strength, which is and they're hugely popular. Which is and that's working with someone else. That's working with another writer to adapt it. And the point I'm making is television seems to be such a huge collaboration where the original author gets very often left behind and whole teams come on and change things out of recognition very often. In theatre, it seems to me that you, as the originating author, have far more control. Would you agree with that?
Much more. It was wonderful. I mean, I worked with Sean McKenna on the adaptations of The Perfect Murder and then Dead Simple and Not Dead Enough, and we're just doing my ghost story, The House on Cold Hill, for next year now.
Oh, are you? That's great. And is that Sean as well? Is that working with Sean?
Yes, and it's wonderful because he obviously you have to change a lot for theatre. You can't have a cast of 200 people and car chases that easily. But I love also what I love about the theatre is the fact that it's dangerous.
Yes.
We had, when we had Dead Simple on, we had Jamie Lomas who was playing Mike Harrison, and he's buried in the coffin in remote woods, and then all his mates get wiped out in a car crash, and he's left there in the woods, in the darkness, underground, and the whole theatre went dark. And he cried out, he said, "Where am I?" And somebody in the audience shouted out, "You're in Woking, mate."
You wouldn't get that in the film, would you?
Well, there's another sort of danger, I can tell you. I mean, I've been knocked out twice on stage during a live performance. Some people thought it was I gave a better performance after coming round than I did before I was knocked out. So that they can be dangerous, physically dangerous places as well as surprising places. So can we talk about your new books? It's a very exciting year in as much as you have the new Roy Grace and a standalone.
Yep. Yeah, the new Roy Grace is called Dead If You Don't. It's coming out on May the 17th. And it's actually, in terms of time frame, it's the shortest time frame. The whole book takes place over 48 hours. And it revolves around a dad who takes his 14-year-old son to watch the first Premier League game at Brighton's Amex Stadium. Bumps into an old friend, looks around, and his son's gone. And he gets a ransom demand on his phone shortly after, but then everything turns out to be not quite as it all seems, without giving too much away.
No, absolutely.
And I've brought in, found out actually the police asked if I would, and I often work quite closely with the police on this. The police in Brighton have had a big problem with Albanians in the last few years, in that after during the Kosovo settlements, Brighton became a settlement area, and there's around 2,000 Albanians in Brighton. And many of them are really good, hard-working, decent people, but there's quite a brutal criminal element. And the police were unable to engage with them because back in their home country, the police are so corrupt that Albanians cannot believe it's possible to have a cop who isn't corrupt.
Right.
And they asked if I would bring the Albanians into my next story to see if I could help broker better relationships with the Albanian community. So I worked very closely with a kind of police liaison officer with the Albanian crime world, which was fascinating.
That's fascinating, Peter. Bringing issues that the police are concerned about, and using your creativity to actually, write about them and show them to a broader public is an extraordinary connection that not many writers have, I suggest.
No, it's great, and it's happened quite a lot. I mean, in Need You Dead, the last one, I brought in super recognizers, and that was at the request of Scotland Yard and actually the Commissioner of the Met, the then Commissioner, Sir Bernard Hogan Howe, that often happens to me. They contacted me and they said that they wanted to publicize their unit of super recognizers. Now, not many people know about super recognizers, but the average human being, probably the three of us talking, can recognize 23% of faces we've ever met. The average police officer, with all his or her training, can only do 24%. And the world's smartest computer software right now is 25%. But when they were trying to identify people after the London riots a few years back, Scotland Yard, and the rioters were all wearing baseball caps and hoodies and God knows what, Scotland Yard discovered a tiny, tiny percentage of people could recognize with almost 95% accuracy somebody just from one single facial feature, from earlobe or the shape of their nostril or their lips. And they actually had a custody officer called Idris Ahmad, and he identified and led to the successful convictions of 150 of the London rioters just from one single watching video and picking them out from one facial feature. And as a result of this, Scotland Yard set up a unit, and it was a mixture of both police and civilian support staff and the general public volunteers who took a test to see if they had those abilities. And he asked if I would write about it so I could make other police forces around the UK and elsewhere in the world aware of this incredibly low-tech but incredibly powerful crime-fighting tool.
My goodness me.
And they used it recently at the O2 for a big event, looking for known mobile phone thieves. And apparently the theft of mobile phones was like 80% lower than any. So it's a very effective crime-writing tool.
Good.
Crime tool.
Well, I mean, that's extraordinary because I'd never heard of that before. I mean, and now the standalone, now what is that going to be?
Absolute proof.
Absolute proof.
Believe it or not, I have been working on this book since 1989.
Good grief.
And it's a thriller. It's kind of in the, I don't like saying the comparison, but it's in the kind of Dan Brown vein.
Great.
It's a thriller about what would happen if somebody credible claimed to have absolute proof of God's existence. And the whole story came about in 1989 when I got a phone call out of the blue one afternoon, before I was ex-directory, an elderly sounding guy saying, "Is that Peter James, the author?" And I went, "Yes." He said, "Thank God I found you. It's taken me 2 weeks. I found every Peter James in the phone book in South Africa." Mr. James, I'm not a lunatic. My name is Harry Nixon. I was a Fleet Air Arm pilot in the war. I'm a recently retired university academic. And I have been given absolute proof of God's existence. And I've been told you're the man who'll help me get taken seriously. I go, "Okay." He said, "I need to come and see you. I'm going to need 4 days of your time." I said, even for God, 4 days is a bit of a big ask. I said, "Do you want to tell me a bit more?" And he said, "Yes." He said, my wife, who was also a retired university professor, recently died of cancer. And before she died, we made an agreement that I would go to a medium and try to communicate with her. And I did this. And instead of my wife coming through, a male came through who said he was a representative of God. God was extremely concerned about the state of the world and felt that if mankind could have faith reaffirmed, it would get us back on an even keel. And as proof of his bona fides, he gave me 3 pieces of information nobody on earth knows. And he said, "There's an author called Peter James who will help me get taken seriously." And I go, "Okay." I said, "And what are these 3 things that you have?" He said, "I can't tell you over the phone. I'll tell you face to face." So I agreed to meet him the following week, and he lived up in Stoke-on-Trent. And he agreed to come down to Brighton. He had a sister who lived in Worthing at the time. So 4 o'clock, he rocks up in this immaculate car. And he looked like he was about 75, looked like a retired bank manager, nicely dressed. with kind of very sad, roomy eyes. And he said, "You and I have to save the world, Mr. James." So I go, "Well, I'll do my best." I sit him down, get him a cup of tea, and I said, "Where do we start?" And he opens this attaché case and he takes out this huge manuscript, about 1,200 pages. And he said, "We start with you reading this." I said, "Well, leave it with me." He said, No, this was channeled to me by God. I cannot let this out of my sight." I said, "It would take me 4 days to read that." He said, "Yep, told you so." I said, "So you're going to sit there for 4 days while I read it?" "Yep." I said, "It's not going to happen." And I said, "Before we go any further, what are these 3 pieces of information you've been given?" He said, "I have been given the compass coordinates for the location of the tomb of Akhenaten, who was the first monotheist pharaoh, Tutankhamun's uncle. I've been given the compass coordinates for the location of the Holy Grail and the compass coordinates for the location of the Ark of the Covenant." And I say, "Okay, and have you checked any of these out?" He said, "Yes." He said, "The Holy Grail is at Chalice Well in Glastonbury." Now, I'd never heard of Chalice Well before. I knew a little bit about Glastonbury being a kind of quite a new age place, but it turned out Chalice Well is a sacred place there close to Glastonbury Tor, where I subsequently discovered Joseph of Arimathea is rumoured to have brought the Holy Grail after the crucifixion. He said, "I'd been dowsing there and I'd been metal detecting, and there was something in the exact spot that I'd been given the coordinates of. I've approached the trustees, it's run by a group of trustees, for permission to do an archaeological dig, and they won't take me seriously. But Mr. James, I believe they would take you seriously." So I go, "Okay." Anyhow, he finally trundles off into the evening, leaves the manuscript. I sit down to read it, and as you can imagine, I get 20 pages in and start losing the will to live. It's just biblical tracts, ramblings, annotations, the lot. A sheer chance, I had to go to Bristol the next day to do a BBC interview, and to finish the interview, and I'm just chatting to the presenter, and she suddenly mentions, out of the blue, Chalice Well. And I think, what's going on? I've never heard of Chalice Well before, and now twice in 2 days. I said, "What do you know about it?" She said, "Oh, my uncle's a trustee of Chalice Well." So now I'm thinking something very strange is going on. And I left her, and I phoned up the guy I was very friendly with, called Dominic Walker, who at that time was Bishop of Reading. And I said, "I need to come and have a chat with you." So I went over to Reading a couple of days later, and we had lunch, and I told him what I've just told you. And I said, "What do you think, Dominic?" And Dominic's a very modern-thinking clergyman. He went on to become Bishop of Monmouth, but he's not in any sense a kind of big holy Joe. He comes from a medical background, got a double first in psychology, and he said, "I would want more than 3 sets of compass coordinates to have proof of God." I said, "What would you want?" He said, "I want something that defies the laws of physics of the universe. I mean, a pretty big miracle." And I said, "Okay, and if somebody could deliver that, what then?" He said, "Do you know what I really think?" He said, "They'd be murdered, because whose God would it be? You've got all the different factions of the Anglican Church, the Catholic Church, Judaic, Islamic, Sikhs, and then you've got, on top of that, the big atheist countries like China who would not want a higher power usurping them." And I thought, I've got my story.
Wow.
And that was the starting point.
Well, I'm entirely hooked.
Yes.
In my mind, I'm casting Sir Ian McKellen.
It's a departure from Roy Grace, isn't it?
My goodness
absolutely
me.
Fascinating.
And that began in 1989, so I take it that gentleman is no longer with us.
Well, it's kind of interesting that we finally, the book was just cooking in my head for years, and then Roy Grace came along, and I have written, as you know, 1 or 2 standalones in between. But I always felt for the book to work, what I had to do was find that miracle that an atheist would have a problem completely dissing, such as something as big as the sun rising from the west instead of the east. And during the intervening years, I spent a lot of time talking to any academic theologian I could find, about asking them, and across all the faiths, asking them what they would consider to be incontrovertible proof of God, and B, what would happen if God could be proven. And just sort of gathering information, and then finally I knuckled down and I wrote the book. And when we were kind of going through the edit, I said to my assistant Linda, I said, be interesting to see what happened to this guy, because that was back in 1989. He was in his 70s then. Anyway, Linda did some detective work and discovered he died 3 years ago. Found the estate agents that had handled the executor sale of his house and gave them my phone number and said if the family would like to contact me, I'd be most interested. And I got a phone call out of the blue just before Christmas from a guy called James Connor, who's a GP in Oxford, who's his grandson. And he said, I'm fascinated because grandfather was not a flake. We met some of his aircrew. He was decorated with the DFM Distinguished Flying Medal for bravery in the war. And we met some of his aircrew, and they said, he's a guy that you'd want to be in a plane with in a crisis. And he just passionately believed that he had this communication and had been charged with this. And so I met with actually James and his brother and his sister, who's a solicitor in Worthing. And they were charming people, deeply fascinating. They had the original diary entry from their grandfather's notebook, and the records of all his attempts at getting taken seriously. So this has been a fascinating postscript.
And over this period of time, maybe there'll be some notice given to that. And so his original thoughts that you might be able to help bring his story to a wider audience are absolutely founded. What date might that be? It's being published on...
Yeah, the book's coming out on October the 4th, and I've kind of written it. The main character is a journalist, Sunday Times journalist, who got the phone call that I got. And it's also seen through the eyes of the boss of one of the world's largest pharmaceutical giants, who would dearly love to get his hands on Christ's DNA, because that would add huge value to their products.
Good.
And it's also from the perspective of one kind of multimillionaire television evangelist who's terrified of the idea of God being proven, because it would show him up to be a fraud.
Now, can I just ask one other question, because this is a real boy's question, Peter. What's your favourite car at the moment? We've got Top Gear starting again shortly, and I know you're a petrol head par excellence, and I know you're a collector of them. What is have you an absolute favourite? Does it change from month to month, from drive to drive? Where are you now as regards your favourite car?
It does change. I mean, I've always been a kind of Aston fan, and I had a gorgeous Vanquish, which is just a phenomenal car. But actually, my current favourite car, I've just been testing it out down on the circuit down in Pembrey. I've got a 1964 Mini Cooper S, which I'm going to be racing a bit this year, and it is the most fun I think I've ever driven a car.
And does Laura join you on these races? Did I hear?
Yeah, she does. We've done 2 races together. When we raced actually my A35 2 years ago, first ever race. Laura, it's 2-driver race, so you change halfway through, and we actually came second in class. And then she had quite a shunt at Donington about 18 months ago in the A35, and it kind of slightly knocked her confidence. But the A35 is quite a difficult car because you sit really low in it, and you like peering out from the bottom of a bucket when you're driving it. As the Cooper S, she actually really enjoyed driving, so we're hoping to do a couple of races together in it this year.
Oh, and so the speed is something that you like, obviously, as a petrolhead. What about comfort? Have you got a favourite car for comfort, just gliding along the highways of Britain?
Yeah, well, I've got the most comfortable car in the world, which is it's 10 years old, Mercedes S-Class. There is no car at any price that's got the comfort. I have it because I can work in it. And you don't get thrown around.
Oh, they're just absolutely beautiful. I've got a Mercedes B-Class, which I can tell you isn't quite the same thing. but it's comfortable enough for me.
That's good. Yeah.
Oh, Peter, well, thank you so much for coming on and talking us today. I mean, so much news. We can't wait for the new books to come out this year, and the new plays as well. That's 2 new books, 2 new plays. Talk about prolific. As ever, it's just a joy to speak to you. And where is your Brighton launch going to be? That's the last question I'll ask this. You always choose extraordinarily glamorous places.
Yeah, it's going to be on obviously not. It's going to be on the 16th at the Amex Stadium. So you must come along.
Oh, of course. Oh, the setting of your new Ray Grace book.
Sounds fantastic.
Lovely.
I'm praying that we'll still be in the Premier League by then, because everybody will be in a good mood if we are.
Yes.
Well, we yes, that would be very helpful. Well, I look forward to seeing you then, if not before. Can I just give a quick plug for your excellent Peter James TV online, which I think is a wonderful resource and hugely entertaining, and thanks for that.
Oh, thanks. Yeah, that's been huge fun. The author studio, and you are in it.
Well, yes, you can find me in there, but there are a lot more interesting people than me to visit on it. So thanks.
Yeah, don't knock it. You're a really good writer. I'm loving your books.
Thank you so much, Peter. That's so good. Well, with love to you and to Lara, and thanks for joining us. And we'll see you very soon.
And hopefully we'll work together again soon as well.
That would be very nice. God bless.
Brilliant.
Bye.
God bless.
Well, there we go. The man himself, the master, Peter James.
Indeed.
Very much looking forward to his launch at the Amex Stadium in Brighton, actually.
Yes, no one does a launch like Peter James, as we said in the interview. His Brighton one in particular, fantastic, but I'm sure he applies the same rules wherever he has his launches around the world. In fact, I know he does. He's very, very good at marketing himself as well. I think writers have to be these days, and they're certainly encouraged by publishers to do so. Whether you're a published author or you publish yourself, it's part of the business now, and it's one I think everyone takes very seriously. You have to get your books seen and heard, and that takes marketing. None better than Peter, though. He's also the master at that, I think, definitely. Yes, and I suddenly realised why Hugh and I, going back to this perennial question of our amnesia, why we were struggling towards the end of that earlier report is we'd just left Terminal 2 and we were standing outside in Arctic conditions, which tends to freeze the little grey cells, mon ami. So that's my final excuse. You weren't hungry then? Oh, I'm always hungry. If you have any suggestions for future guests on the podcast, please do get in touch with us. Next week's guest actually was a suggestion, not by a listener, but by a previous guest, by Neil Dudgeon, who was our very first guest on this show. If you have any suggestions, you can get in touch with us. You can email hello@partnersincrime.online. You can visit our website, which is partnersincrime.online. You can find us on Facebook under Partners in Crime Podcast, or our Twitter account is @CrimeFicPodcast. Now, do please also subscribe to the podcast to make sure you don't miss any episodes. It's completely free to do so, and you can do that on iTunes, Stitcher, YouTube, or Google Play, whichever your preferred method of listening is. Now, we should also mention that our sponsors on the podcast are the fantastic Kobo. They are the world's favourite local bookshop, perfected. They've got more than 5 million titles available, and you don't even need a fancy e-reader to read their books. You can get the free Kobo app for your mobile device, and you can read any book you like on there. And in fact, as a listener to Partners in Crime, you can get an exclusive 90% off of your first ebook purchase with Kobo. Just go to kobo.com and enter the promo code CRIME at the checkout. Next week, we'll be speaking to Kath Staincliffe, who is the writer of ITV's Blue Murder, starring Caroline Quentin, and the author of the Scott and Bailey books, based on the hit TV series. That's an absolutely fascinating interview, so don't miss that next week on episode 7.
Partners in Crime was presented by Adam Croft and Robert Dawes and produced by Adam Croft. The theme tune was by the Caesareans. The Partners in Crime logo and imagery were designed by Stuart Beisch. Partners in Crime is sponsored by Kobo, your favourite local bookshop, perfected.